just how like a lot of people look at Tailwind classes and think that they're obnoxiously long and they're like, what is this? I want to do the same for a CSS selector. I want to write one that's so obnoxiously esoteric and weird and long that someone's like, what is this? And I'm like, that's right.
In addition, we can now have more powerful selectors than we've ever had before with weaker specificity. And I don't know what a good metaphor is, but like it's somehow like someone who's like super buff, but also like hella gentle with kittens.
Visit Planet CSS.
We are back in 2024, and this time we are still bad at CSS, but we aspire to do more. We aspire to be better. We aspire to be greater. So in this episode, we're going to be dropping a very long, possibly long, Adam probably more than me, list of things that we resolved to be better at in CSS in 2024. Adam, how is the new year going for you?
It's good. Classic parenting new year. Had some ups and some downs. You know, I got punched in the face but I also got a gift, you know, and that's just life sometimes. Sometimes you got a roller coaster. How about you, man?
I find with children that people sometimes think you're speaking in metaphors and you're usually not. So in your case, when you're saying you got punched in the face, someone would be like, metaphor? And you're like, not a metaphor. I actually got punched in the face.
In this case, it's a metaphor, but dude,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, might as well have been a punch in the face, you know? I'm sure someone punched me in the face. My dog, yeah, she punches us in the face all the time. Oh, it's so sweet.
Yeah.
She does it on accident. I think it's because we pet her head, you know? She's like, here, let me pet your face. And you're like, ow! Don't do that.
Well, in the world of CSS, Adam, there are many new things coming to CSS, and there are many old things that are still new. CSS is a lot like a syndicate show. Just because there are old shows, there are still many of them you have not seen, and many things, and you see the episode for the first time, it's new to you. And that what many CSS features are like. And so in my list of things, I actually don't have anything new, which I imagine you have new. I just have old new. That's how I do my Kanban boards. You know, you have like in progress, and then you have like done, and then you have done for when it's actually done. You know, you can say
Final.
like someone's like, is it done? And you're like, it's not done. You're like, oh, it's done. And they're like, well, is it done? You're like, oh, no, it's not done. It's just done. But
like Kanban, it's like Seinfeld would say, people just like to say that word like salsa.
Salsa, Kanban. This podcast is brought to you by Kanban and salsa.
And Jerry Seinfeld, that'd be sweet. I mean, I have a few new things in here, but some of them are old things. Some of them are just skills I want to refine. You know, like I love and I live by this thought process of the more you understand something, usually the more you learn you don't know. Right. Yeah. And that's kind of an ethos of this show as well. Is sure, we dig in, we care, we get deep into CSS, but wow, the more we do that, the more we learn we don't know. So I've got refinements, lots of things I want to get better at.
Actually, that's a perfect segue. You lead off.
Okay, well, one is not very surprising, which is I want to finish Open Props v2. I've got a doc site that's built with Astro with little svelte islands, which is really cool that they hydrate on scroll as you scroll into them. So it's like you go to a doc page, super lightweight, static render. You scroll down a little bit, interactive widget, you know, and it just loads itself. Super rad. I love how easy they make that.
Yes.
Yeah, you want to? Yeah, Astro.
Just massive Astro fan, so 100% agree.
Yep, pretty sick. And then, so yeah, within that also, with the doc site, I have modernization efforts. This is like all the colors can be in OKLCH. I'll still serve the old stuff if you want to grab the old stuff, but I just, moving right into OKLCH and just whatever else I can that feels stable. Like what hit baseline in 2023, I'll stick that in the lib. I want to finish those utilities. Actually, side note, you can try the utilities today. They're just on like kind of a secret. They're in the beta channel published on NPM, so you just got to go look for them. If you're in the Discord, you can get the links. Anyway, also forms and dialogues. So I want to have like more of these kind of like component helpers where the single import and you get something beautiful, override it with custom properties. So that's number one, OPv2. Nice. How about you?
Well, My first one is I want to actually start using Subgrid because, as Adam knows, so I was working on a fairly complex grid layout a while back for the Firebase blog, and I was constantly hitting up Adam, being like, "How do I do this? How do I do that?" And then Adam was like, "What you really need is Subgrid." And that would really solve your problems. And so I learned about Subgrid in that moment, and I became insufferable, and I wanted it, and I complained about it, about not having it. And Adam taught me how to emulate Subgrid, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with Grid, you display Grid, and then Grid can only lay out its direct children. So if you got a main tag with its style, or the main tag that's set to display Grid, and it has a bunch of aside sections in it, it can reach those. But inside of those, no, it doesn't know anything about those. And if you have ever laid out anything in Sketch or Figma, you know that if you can look at each layer in Sketch and Figma like it's an element, well, there's usually multiple nestings of elements inside of those ones, inside of the sketch diagram. And we use those rulers or those guides to try to snap everything in place with our layouts. Well, Grid itself can't really give you those snap in places unless you use everything in 2 layers. So you have 1 layer and everything goes right underneath. That's what Grid can do. With Subgrid, it says, you know what, that's fine. I know what my parent grid is. Just say, set Subgrid, and I will know what to do. I will inherit the grid properties from above, which is really great. But that is something new-ish. And for a while, if you wanted to use Subgrid, you would have to emulate Subgrid by setting display grid, setting grid columns -1. Pretty much you're just -1, 1, or just passing down all of the grid properties, which you can do through custom properties. You can do it. It's annoying. I hated doing it. I constantly messed up my grids doing it that way and having to go back and fix it. And I was always like, I want Subgrid. I want Subgrid. And then Subgrid came, and I was like, I'm not updating my layouts. I'm not doing that. And I was kind of like a dog who was chasing after a car, and then I caught the car and I didn't know what to do with it. So this year, I'm actually going to do something with that car, and I'm going to use Subgrid. So that's my one.
Sick. That was a great explanation. And I have 3 comments while you were talking. I was like, I loved what you're saying so much. Okay, first comment is, I could just say this and you'll probably know exactly what I mean, is grid drilling.
Yeah, grid drilling.
You were grid drilling, right? You're even like, or maybe that's even what Subgrid is. Subgrid is grid drilling.
Grid drilling as a service, but as a property.
Yeah. And anyway, if you're listening and you don't know what I mean, everyone, it's like I'm making fun of prop drilling, where you have to pass your props down to the child, down to their children, down to their children. Everyone's got to hand it down like a baton. It's super annoying. It's usually code smell, but I guess grid drilling is desirable. We want this.
Well, I want it with Subgrid. I do not like it with, I don't want to get on tangent. If we had like mixins, then that could be like native mixins in CSS, then maybe grid drilling could be a little
There's a spec
nicer.
proposal for those.
Ooh, you know what? I want to get into it because we get so many, but we can do a whole episode on that because mixins has it's been a long standing
Mixins
desire.
and functions, custom functions.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about custom functions. Okay, Adam, number 2? What is your second resolution?
The CSS grid is also like a donut grid. So we talked about donut scope, and grid is it's donut by default. Donut by default. There you go. I need that on a t-shirt. Then the last. Go ahead. Yeah.
No. Explain to us the donut by default here. Are you talking about with CSS grid that it's like donut as in it's leaking from the inherited properties, like in the same way that scope does?
It's like the grid that you create only goes down to direct descendants and then ends. Yeah. So it has a top and a bottom that are really clear. And so, whereas you get me. Anyway, the other comment was, I liked thinking that, and you even made a comment like a car, but like, have you ever heard the term, apple doesn't fall too far from the tree?
Yeah.
The funnier version is the fart doesn't fall that far from the butt.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, okay. What I'm getting at here is like grid children want to be like their parents in this case. Like Subgrid is like a kid that like wants to be like dad, or wants to be like mom or whatever. And it's just kind of cute. And so, or maybe it's even more like the kids want their parents' house. So Subgrid is when the kids are like, hey, I'm old enough, give me the house. And you're like, I'll share it with you. Okay, so maybe it's like sharing rooms. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Those are my 3 stupid comments about your thing.
No, I agree. Subgrid is just like, I understand it. I desperately wanted it. I think it's amazing. I think it completes the vision of grid itself.
Yeah.
And then I didn't use it. Just like it's like a gym membership. You're like, there's so many analogies. Let's move on. We'll move on to number 2. Adam, what is your second
Yes.
resolution?
Second resolution is I haven't built something with Tailwind in over a year, and I would like to. I'd also like to build something with StyleX as something of large complexity, and Panda CSS. So I have 3 different technologies. I'm just like one of those people, I don't know it until I've used it with my hands. And then I also can forget things if I haven't done it in a while. So Tailwind, I want to get back in there. StyleX and Panda CSS are 2 atomic CSS generating inline JavaScript. They feel like you're writing inline JavaScript, but they generate an atomic style sheet for you, very much like what was the one that was sprinkles? We had vanilla extract, so you got something like that. So it's just kind of like getting that rich understanding and not just a superficial understanding, and then replenishing my Tailwind knowledge. I kind of want to go in with Tailwind and flex a lot of new stuff. I'm like, I want to teach it new tricks just to see what that workflow is like. I've mostly just used it as it was out of the box, and I want to push it and just see.
We should do that. We should both, because I haven't used Tailwind in quite a while too, and we'll do our Tailwind episode where we have our thoughts on that, which I'm sure that nothing wrong will come from that.
No.
And with StyleX is, for those who are unaware, it is a CSS library, which is extended through JavaScript. But it's not quite a CSS and JS library. It is a little, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't used it. I just looked through it and I read your thingamadoo about
blog post I wrote,
post about open props and StyleX, which seemed very interesting to me. Is that you write everything in JavaScript, extend all the classes and add them into your elements and everything in JavaScript. However, behind the scenes, it's really just generating a CSS style sheet, very similar to something you would get with like CSS modules. But it's sort of like if CSS modules and CSS and JS like had a treaty, a compromise treaty of like what they wanted. That's kind of seemed like I want to write it in CSS and apply it to my elements, like very like CSS and JS style, scoped in everything like that, and then. But CSS land was like, oh, but we are not just putting everything in a style attribute. That is ludicrous. It needs to be in a style sheet. And then they're like, okay, fine. This is what we'll do. That's kind of StyleX?
Yeah, it's a really good one. And for some reason, it made me think that when developers are writing styles this way, they're Spice Girls, because they want to just tell it what they want, what they really, really want, and they tell it what they want, what they really, really want, and then the library, mix an atomic style sheet. What?
I gotta give you that one. That was good. That was good.
Dork on the mic. Yeah, that is what StyleX does. Yeah, but it's TypeScript, so you're in like typed variables, and so you have to go define your variables, just like you might consts. I have quests with my consts. Sorry, this is very distracting. And yeah, it's all typed. You get lots of great type ahead. You define what you want per module, and then it does all the hard work to return you unique atomic classes that you just sort of spread onto your elements like you've known and loved. So yeah, it's a lot like CSS modules, except the names are even more robotic.
Yeah.
Welcome to class name Goobly-Gaki-Gooble-Gobok-126.
And it powers Instagram.com, which is just, a lot of people go to that site,
Yeah, it's legit. That's a legit use case. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. So yeah, React finally has a default styling suggestion. And it was cool that open props was an optional additional include that they prepackaged in that library. Kind of rad.
Awesome. Well, my second resolution is I want to be more deliberate and just better about adding interactive animations with my CSS. So as you are scrolling through something, I want to, how do I sprinkle in some scroll animations, but not like not like a person who downloads Photoshop for the first time and discovers all the features and then just is like, if I use the
Liquify
clone
tool.
tool, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be like that, but I want to find the areas in which interactive animations can just be that nice additive boost. So whether that's through a nice little view transition here, where it's like, oh, that was nice. As I scrolled through, just like a little added effect, as you know, and that is going to require hooking up some JavaScript as well in many cases. But I want to find that extra little oomph and where it just feels nice. And I realize I don't have, especially after the episode we did on scroll animations, I realized, oh yeah, I don't like, I understood what you said, but then I felt guilty because I was like, I don't do this. I don't use these things. And so that's one of the things I wanted to do. I'm like, and it made sense to me, and it realized that CSS has spent so much time over the last, few years adding in so many amazing UI, just animation, these moments of delight features that we're so used to on native. And on native, it just, I click a thing and I get the transition through it, or the pop over, or all the cool stuff that only takes a little bit of code to do. We have that now. And just like I was talking about with Subgrid, I complained long and long about not being able to do these things or it being too difficult. It is easier than ever right now to do these things. And I need to just kind of get out of that way of my stubborn old way of doing things, just reaching for the comfortable and just upgrading, even though it might require thinking. So that's number two. Better use modern interactive animations where it makes sense.
Yep, you want to sprinkle some magic fairy dust very subtly, because you don't want to be sprinkling angel dust on there. That's a little too extreme in terms of sprinkles. Some people are gonna be like, angel dust sounds quite nice. And you're like, yeah, Google
sure
it. Just
yeah. If we have older generation listening to the podcast, they'll laugh. I think that's quite an old reference. I don't think nowadays, I'm not going to get into that.
let's just let that one be.
We'll just let that one be. Everyone's gonna be like, how is he so up to date on the naming convention for draw? You know what? I don't want to know.
It's because I watch biker shows. They're always teaching me lingo. All right. Well, my next one is yeah. I want to use Deno's storage API that they came out with, the sort of like distributed key value store, to add a like button on my website. I'd like to do that. Deno's very fun. I love all of my time inside of Deno. So I'm like, oh, a little KV store. Yeah, I'll try that.
Did you not see what you did? You said, I'm going to add a like button because I like that. I don't know if I was like, oh, look at that. You can like your own okay. All right. This is great podcast material. That's great. I love, that's also, maybe you can, use my resolution to add delightful sprinkled in angel dust of magic dust of a nice little animation when you click that. I think that's like one of those things when you go to a developer blog and you see that they have like a like button or like the charging up heart or lightning bolt next to the article, you're like, this person has their life together. I bet you they're
that was well spent 12 hours, Josh Kumo, on that like button. I'm very jealous that you got that much time to put into it.
Josh's is definitely one of the best out there.
One of the best, yeah.
Yeah,
yep.
It is. Because it makes the noise too.
It's
like
to Josh.
Goo.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay.
All the dust. There was fairy dust. There's multiple kinds of dust sprinkled on that button.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, my next one, and this one, I actually feel pretty proud of this one. I realized I want to write more powerful selectors. This is kind of going against the grain of I want to put everything in a class, utility classes. I'm like, no, I understand how that works. I want to go back and say, what can I fit into a selector? How powerful can I get things? Because again, CSS selectors were already incredibly powerful to begin with. And, hence why we have the query selector API, because it turns out you can do quite amazing things with that. And I want to be able to figure out all of these advanced ways of doing that. How can I basically turn query selectors into like regex in my head? Which is not a great analogy since I don't know regex. And now that we have like LLMs, I'm like, oh great, I don't have to learn regex at all. I'm really
Don't
glad
do
I never.
regex in your mind. Turn it into map filter reduce. Turn it into functional
Yeah,
programming, into grabbing data sets and iterating and filtering your way to and mapping your way into
yeah,
the things that you actually want inside of this. At least that's
yeah.
how I've really liked thinking about selectors.
That's a really good way of thinking about it because with regex, you're taking, a text document or just big stream of text or
A
whatever the
blob.
proper
Query the
blob. There we
blob.
go. Right. And you're like, hey, and then within this blob, there is a pattern that I want you to find. And within there, there's different semantics of finding it on whatever casing or whatever, or how many instances or all this stuff. It's amazing what you can do with regex. But you're right. That is scan through this thing, this blob. Whereas when we're talking about CSS, we have to remember, because I commonly have to remember this, is that it is mapped to the DOM, which is basically a tree, which does very well with functional programming, with map filter and reducing. You're like, let me filter out these nodes, let me reduce it down to here. Okay, and that's a really good way of putting it. It's a totally different data structure in which you are conducting your operation on. So you're right. It's the mental model is much better. You could easily just show a selector and then have the DOM nodes highlight or disappear or whatever in some visual node, and it would probably work out. It would make more sense than a big blob of text. So that's that's one of the things I want to do. I want to spend more time being powerful with my CSS selector. I want to write a really, just how like a lot of people look at Tailwind classes and think that they're obnoxiously long and they're like, what is this? I want to do the same for a CSS selector. I want to write one that's so obnoxiously esoteric and weird and long that someone's like, what is this? And I'm like, that's right. That bad boy can fit a lot of nodes in
Yeah,
that
just
bad
pack it
boy.
full of double negatives in there. Like
Yeah.
it's not this. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
then what is it, David? You're like, well, it's not these. Like, this is annoying, David. Just tell me what you want, what you really, really want. But just kidding. About
Two
powerful
spice words.
selectors. Yeah, I know. I don't know. It's in my head now. I liked this thought. Okay, so you're like, I want to write more powerful selectors. And I had this immediate reaction, which was CSS is going to facilitate that. But in addition, we can now have more powerful selectors than we've ever had before with weaker specificity. And I
Yep.
don't know what a good metaphor is, but like it's somehow like someone who's like super buff, but also like hella gentle with kittens, you know? I don't know. There's like a metaphor for super strength that's actually super gentle.
I'm going to take a homework item on that one.
All right,
Because I
cool.
think you're right. You're somewhere there. And it's true. You have, I think like in the past, CSS was a bit of a video game when you were writing selectors because you're like, points. I need more points. How do I get all the points? And then we realized that it's, when you try really hard, you tend, to not, be. I've come up with a metaphor too. I didn't get it. But when you got to let something go, to if you really love it, let it go. So let's have selectors that have zero specificity. So like our wheres, and even
Yeah.
with at scope, that's a way of saying, hey, let me scope things out with no specificity. That's it. Oh, that's a real. Even though we had our whole thing about why would we use scope, I now realize that I can write hella complex selectors with scope because I get a benefit of scoping out from here to there or whatever, and there's no added specificity in which I'm scoping in. So that's a really
Yeah.
good point. Yeah, there's more ways to do more powerful things with less points than before.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. So yeah, that's a great goal. I totally empathize with that one. All right, so my next one is I want to build more with the Anchor API. So yeah, you were like, Adam's gonna have some new stuff in here. The Anchor API is very, very cool, very powerful, and it's kind of like scroll-driven animations where we're still discovering additional use cases beyond what it was initially made for. Like these are like when we get strong primitives, they can do cool things that we hadn't thought about. And I want to dive into all the weird things and the regular things that you can do with the Anchor API this year. So I'm hoping to see that hit more browsers so that I can sort of not just be inside of Chrome only, but the Anchor API.
So
I
a
want it.
question I have for you about the Anchor API is, hypothetically, if someone's listening and they don't know what the Anchor API is, how would you explain that to them, for the audience only?
Yes, it's a tether. It's like your element becomes a kite, and then you take the string from the kite and you choose which element it's attached to. And then instead of it being blown around by the wind, you're like, hey, I like you to float below the element. I like you to float above the element. And it just stays there with the little string tied. And then you can build some rules. And it's like, if you have enough room, be on top. If you don't have room on top, go to the bottom. Yeah.
It's kind of, I don't know if I'm just anchoring on the word here. Yeah, very proud of myself. Is this more like anchor points? Like if you're using After Effects or something like that, and you need something to rotate around a certain point, you can, by default, you have the anchor point in the center, so it spins in the middle. Or if you wanted to spin on its side axis or on a
It is
corner,
like a transform origin, yeah,
yeah,
where
the transform origin is the CSS term. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's a positioning origin. So yeah, you get to the origin though, as opposed to being an absolute position that's based off of the relative position of the element. The origin is some element, and you get to name it, and then it can orient based off of that
Okay.
dynamically discovered element in the DOM, and then you're positioned off of it.
Well, thank you for explaining that for the audience.
That was a cool way
And
to kind of reverse think it too. I like it as like a transform origin like
yeah,
behavior. Nice.
well, we'll have to do a whole episode of that because the audience needs to learn more about that one. Yeah. So my next one is pretty basic, and it's something that you have already done, or actually you're currently working on, and it has inspired me. And it's I want to be better at writing or at styling form inputs. This is such a skill in web development that I think we take for granted, or that we make way more complicated all the time. Like you can architect your own forms if you want, or you can use all of the form controls, and there's so many things that the browser gives you, and there's so many things that the browser taketh away at the same time. It is a bit of a double-edged sword there. Like you get validation, you can do really cool things with validation, you get the form API, you get all this great stuff, and then you also get inputs, and those aren't as good. And then you also get input type, file upload, and then that one is not fun. And
Yeah, you got to chisel the crust off of those, right? You're just like,
yeah,
ooh, barnacles all over this. Let me get it back to its naked, pure state, and I'll build it up.
and I have done things with that where I've built good enough components, I believe, with like drag and drop uploads and type of things, and minor proxying of input controls to try to make things look nicer, but very dumbed down. And I realized, and seeing a lot of your examples and just stuff online, is thinking, you know, this is a huge skill, is that anyone can build, not anyone, but it's, you can, the first step one, build a form. Step two, style it to make it look great with validation and alerts and all that stuff. Step three, add in a bit more more customization to the controls and all of that to make it feel more custom. And then step four, which is like, I guess I'm going like the galaxy brain, is doing the proxying it and doing all of the advanced stuff and the really cool drop down lists. And a lot of that has gotten easier over time, which I guess this is a common theme in my resolutions. Is like, use the easier stuff CSS has given you. Be thankful, be happy, do the good thing, make it your life easier. But I want to do that with CSS form controls, because I realize, or CSS styling on form controls, because this is something that is easier than ever, and at the same time still tricky. So it is a nice mix, I believe, of saying like, I can do more now, but I still have to understand the nuance, and that can be a really valuable place to be. So
Yeah, it's going to fit really well with your powerful selectors also, because you got
exactly.
has included with all with the pseudo states of inputs. There's so much that you can do there. So yeah, have fun with that. That's going to be cool stuff.
Yeah. What's your next resolution, Adam?
My next one is I am sunsetting GUI challenges. I'm like, oh, you know what? GUI challenges. I made 3 albums over 3 years. There's 12 songs in each album. Every month came out with a new song. People listened. Some people really liked the songs, but it never went past a low hum. You know, it was like it was self-sustaining, had a lot of good features, but just wasn't really resonating.
You
Um,
know, it's a hit to I hate to interrupt your thing, but I have a theory
oh, you're
on
good.
this
You're good. Yeah.
because I've been GUI challenger. We also work together, so it's easier for me to follow along. And you're my friend, so it's also easy too.
Oh.
However, one of the things I do know, I believe that if it's kind of like when they added bookmarks to X or Twitter or whatever, and that is never ever that's going to be a mark of being really old. Is you're going to be like, I can't say X. But it's kind of like when they added bookmarks as this, like you could see how many people have bookmarked it, and you're like, oh wow, and you saw that some tweets would go viral, and you would say like, oh wow, a lot of people uh, bookmarked that tweet. Like it had like 5,000 bookmarks, and it's like 700 likes or something like that, and you're like, what? I feel like that is a lot of GUI challenges. I bet you can't see it, but you are probably saved in so many YouTube playlists and bookmarked in so many things, or hid in so many Notion sheets or Excel sheets on like roadmap to learning UI or CSS. And I bet you if you could see your bookmark stats, and then it's just people who get into it and they're like, oh, this is hard. This is really hard. Tomorrow. Like that's how I see it. Like you and like your GUI challenges are like ab workout videos on YouTube. There's a lot of them. How many people are going through them? Like that's how I see it. So you should feel more proud of that. It had a better than a low hum, I would say. I think that
I
people just
I'm
saw
very
like
proud
this
of
is
it. It's just like it wasn't like the whole concept was there was two main concepts. I don't want to dwell on this too long, but like I was just thinking. I was like, I want to show you the thinking because I assume you're all going to go build this in your own framework and your own tools and whatever y'all are doing. So I want to share the thinking and the outcomes that I was interested in, and that's why it was called Thinking on Something. But it has a great long tail. So, you're going to need a carousel at some point, and you're going to want to know all the thoughts about a carousel. And so this show was really good. It also, I felt, the show had very polished,
Oh yeah.
and they were interoperable components. So they worked across every screen. They were mobile and desktop ready, but they were polished, but not too polished. And I mean that like there's YouTubers or there's people on Twitter that make phenomenally amazing examples. And then you're like, that's such a cool example. I'll never use not a single piece of the entire thing you just did because it's so specifically dope that it's actually not adaptable to anything else. And I was like, GUI challenges is sort of like it's not bland, but it's not super spicy and opinionated. It's like somewhere in the middle. Like I tried to make them easy to strip away what I put there, and that you could go do your own thing. But I don't know. I never saw massive adoption there, but I have lots of new ideas. A couple of them are surfacing pretty quickly to the top, and I'm excited. I think I have some cool. I'm still going to be building UI and teaching,
Oh yeah.
how to build stuff.
No, it's just all
but
about
yeah.
where you put your time, and that is a very time-consuming show.
No more puppet. No more puppet Adam.
No more zombie Adam.
I did like making the zombie Adam. I should make a bunch of silly puppets afterwards, like all the time I have just to sit and puppet a tune. Yeah. No, I don't have that time.
Well, pour one out for GUI challenges, but
pour one out for GUI challenges, y'all. Go watch it. Go start submitting your ideas because that was the other thing. The challenge was you do it your way and share it with everyone, and we can all grow. And no one was doing it their way. They were all watching it, going, "Thank you.
Yeah, you did a good job." Everyone's like, it's like that scene in Old School where Will Ferrell debates James Carville, and he, has that goes blacks out and says that big retort, and then James Carville goes, "I have no further comments. It was said perfectly." That was like GUI challenges. You were like, "No, how would you improve it?" And people were like, "I think you did that."
I think
So,
you okay.
Good.
Yep, and that's part of what I mean. The show, like, it had some, I don't know, it needs to be a little refined. So I'll figure that out. Do you have more resolutions?
I have one more.
Okay.
And this one, I realized this is a total theme. This one is actually use Cascade layers. I followed Cascade layers back when it was Cascade layers. It's odd how much I know about Cascade layers, understand a fair amount of it, and have little things with it, but never really put it into practice. As great browser adoption, and I need to do that. Cascade layers to me is amazing because not only does it solve a lot of problems we have in terms of specificity. We're talking about how do I write scoped or targeted CSS with less points? Well, Cascade layers is a great way of doing that. And another thing about Cascade layers that is really impressive is that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, you know the history better than I do, but Miriam Suzanne proposed it back in 2020-ish timeframe. And like almost immediately, everyone was like, yeah, this is good. Let's do that. And then it just like went in. And then before we knew it, it's like 96, 98%, can I use .com rate? And that is amazing. And that is a blessing given to us. And I looked at that and I was like, yeah, that is good. And then I'm like, am I going to use that? And I'm like, yeah. Oh, am I? No, I'm not. But I am, but I'm not, but I will. But I should. I don't know. So that's what I'm going to do this year. I'm like, no, use the thing that makes it easier. Like, stop eating cereal with a screwdriver. Use the spoon. That's not a good metaphor, but
well, I mean, as if it's a flathead, yeah, you might get one kernel every bite. It's pretty good.
No, it was a Phillips head, man. I was just staring at. No, it was.
Man, it's got dangerous.
But that's
dangerous and milk reminds me of Terminator. You remember like that opening scene? Someone's like just about to get a glass of milk and they get shot, and then there's like bloody milk on the ground. I was like, ew, that's gross together. It's on the floor. Who's going to clean that mess up? I hope it's not. Anyway, also, I love your perspective on this because I feel like it's what everyone is doing right now, except weirdos like me that can deploy a site with native nesting and Cascade layers on it. Like a lot of other people can't take those risks and have legacy stuff to deal with, and they're just not net newing. And I foresee 2024 and probably 2025 and beyond, let's just be honest, are years as people finally start to adopt this stuff, because they're just like you. They're going, I love that feature. I love that feature. I love that. I love that. I can't use it. I can't use it. I can't use it. Like they're just like dying.
Even, it's in the browser support excuse. Not there. It's the experience. It is the learning gap. It's that just anytime you learn anything, there is that hump of, oh, frick. And we are, as a human species, we are so resistant to that dip of suck of learning something. And with CSS, I spend a lot of time learning these things and being like, I understand it. Now I'm not going to use it. And using it is a whole other avenue of that dip of suck, where it's like, oh, I understand it, and now I go to use it and you're like, oh my god. Like the first time I went to use CSS Grid, I like read all the stuff on it, like really thought I totally understood it, and then I created a grid and I couldn't see anything on the page. And I was like, what? I just studied grid for like 10 hours. And I was like, what? I wrote all these notes. I have a notebook. And I was like, why? What can I see the grid? Oh, there's nothing in the grid. So it's, I didn't put a border on the grid. I was just like, display a grid. I didn't even set the height. I was like, oh, because, and so I was sitting here like, I'm a failure. Oh, there's just nothing in the grid. And those are the things that you have to do. You have to stumble over those blocks. You have to have that humility. You gotta take your lumps and use it and just get better. So.
It's funny you said lumps. Last night I was teasing that I would make a restaurant called Lumps. And
it's just such a way. You're like, funny enough. The lumps.
The lumps. I was like, all the food is lumps. And the mashed potatoes, they served in a lump with lumps. Our smoothies, kind of lumpy. They're blended. They're just lumpy. Everything is lumpy. Anyway, that was... I'm very easily distracted, obviously. But what you're saying about grid is one of mine. That's coming up here. I think it's one of my... Okay, yeah, it's improved skills with layouts with grid and Flexbox. Yeah. That's one of my CSS... Like, I've written a hell of a lot of grid. I have tons of the spec memorized. I have tons of the Flexbox stuff. I still sit down and have to like hack one out over 10, 20, 30 minutes where I'm like, dang, this is tricky and I have to really get deep. So I'm hoping to refine that even further in 2024.
Yeah. I maybe this year I will remember which axis is which when I am using Flexbox, because I know about the main axis and the cross axis and I can see them in my head. But then as soon as I start to change the flex direction, I'm like, and then that's fine. I'm like, okay, it's switched. But then when I look at align items and justify content, I'm like, dang it. And I'm like, I have to set both to remember which one goes to which. And this year, maybe, and actually, one time I was having this conversation with Paul Lewis and Surma, and I was like, thinking, you were having the conversation, thinking someone would be like, yeah, haha. And they're like, no, 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 no. You know this because this means this and that means that. You will never mess it up again. And I just remember being like, yeah, that was like 4 years ago. So,
Yep, I still forget them. I do the same thing with flex direction, where I know that if I set display grid, I'm going to get stacks on top of each other, like a vertical stack, right? Which I guess is rows.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so then if I do display flex, I get columns. And then I often want to change the directionality. And I'm like, oh, okay, flex direction, row, column, row. Damn it. Which one is it?
Yes.
I'm like, whichever one you're not now. Can I, is there a keyword for that?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh my gosh. I relate so much to that.
Grid auto flows the same thing where I'm like, okay, I got a grid. Here's the regular. I want it to do the other one. The other, is it row or? And then sometimes I'm like columns. No, column. It's just it's one column. No, it's multiple columns. Is it row or rows? Damn it, Scooby! And you're just like, yeah, I can't get it. All right, so I've got wrap up prefers reduced data. I've had that in tag review. I wrote the code in Chromium. It's sitting there. It's like a CL that if it gets merged, then we will have prefers reduced data in Chrome. And I need to clear up the finals of the spec stuff. There's just been some questions that have gone unanswered. So time has passed. It needs to get wrapped up. So I'm hoping to wrap that one up. I've got prototype container query debugging with VisBug. I had a very interesting idea the other day where I'm like, what if you just launch VisBug with the current and you select some elements or an element and you launch container query mode. And all I do is I clone everything out of that node into a floating pop-up or something like that and allow you to resize it. And that way you can test your container queries very much as if they were in an isolation mode or if you were like double clicking in Flash or Illustrator or whatever. But I'll simulate that with VisBug. So I think I can make a very compelling and meaningful container query debugging tool with VisBug. And I'd like to prototype that.
That would be very helpful because that's a tricky part to container queries is that
It is. We're all putting resize handles on it or trying to get the browser window to be small. And you're like, that's not the same thing as the container query, blah.
Yeah, you're still thinking in context of the page, the viewport. Like I'm always still thinking, I'm like, let me just squeeze the viewport to get to the container. It's that's a tough. I thought about writing that too. Like start thinking in container queries and stop thinking in viewport. Yeah.
I have another container query one too, which is find more use cases for container queries that isn't cards.
I don't know if you're going to do that one.
That's the hardest one on the list.
Oh no, that's not going to happen. No, it's funny because there are so many, but it's so true. It's probably one of the reasons why learning container queries is really hard because everyone's like, okay, so imagine you have a card and the card has 3 pieces. And then if you resize, you move the header over and people are like, but I could do that with a media query. And you're like, yeah, but this one is different. So it's hard to understand that. So I agree. I think if there could be one of the things that helped my brain click, as I saw Stephanie Eccles did an article on container queries where she used a grid template. We're using the actual like ASCII art for creating a grid with container queries and switching that grid, that ASCII art to change it. It was a card too, I think. But the way that it worked I was like, I know. But the way that they assigned the grid template, or the way she changed the grid template, was really interesting. And I'd never seen anyone use grid template before, other than like, hey, look at me use grid template. Um, and and to use it in a way that actually made sense too. I was like, that's it didn't really count so much for container queries. It did it a bit, but it really did for grid template. I was like, +1. You just found a great use for grid template.
Yeah, that is nice. In fact, grid defined and firmly sized grid templates are really, really good in combination with container queries. Because
Yeah.
a container query is going to lose its intrinsic sizing and it needs something to tell it what to be. It's a really good match. Excellent demo, Stephanie. That sounds really meaningful to change out the grid template areas in a container query. Very cool. I got another one here, which is add. So, like, I made Gradient.style, which I visit all the time, and I build gradients in it. It's really fun, but it can't do multi-background layer gradients yet, and that's I've actually tried to do it twice. It's so the whole thing's a SvelteKit app, and the way that the data is all made right now is on a single gradient, and I have to go refactor the entire thing to work with a collection of gradients, and then a concept of a selected gradient within that array. And I've got it mostly working 2 times, but every time I do it, I'm like, you know what? Every time I redo it and refactor, it's better, stronger, faster. So I'll just try it again some other time until I can get that right series of features there. I also kind of want to stretch goal with Gradient.style and have it be able to make masks. That way you could visually create a transparent mask and then apply it to something and build it visually, because I know they're never going to do this in DevTools. Even though it would be sick, and it's always a poke in the dark type of bullshit workflow. And I'd like to fix that, or at least make something that's handy for me, which I would assume would help someone else. But yeah, some stretch goals for Gradient.style there.
That, yeah. Gradients are always popular. And one of the things I want to do with my resolution on interactions is I want to work on animated gradients, because
Yeah.
that sort of slow animated gradient effect is not really hard, but also kind of nuanced. And to get to look right, to feel right, and everything. Another resolution. Oh, I'll continue the
Nice.
I'll
Yeah.
add a last one. As I want to finally it's just sticking to my theme. I want to finally understand blend modes. I'm like, blend modes. Yeah, you got light, and then there's a blend, and then the light comes out, and then it was different than the light that came through, and that's a blend mode. And that's like how and then you're like, and you could darken the light, you could diffuse it, and why would you use a diffused? I'm like, because I needed diffusion. Like I understand like blend modes enough to, you know, I don't, but I would like to be able to understand blend modes enough to know, like, oh, I should diffuse, I should probably do this kind of one. And so that's one of the things I do this show, like actually understand blend modes to the point where it's a tool in the tool belt.
Nice. Yes, not where you're just cycling through the list of options. And yeah, that's what
Yes.
we all do still. Yep. I've
You're like,
even written
that
blog
one.
posts on how each of those work. I'm like, when it sees a pixel that's lighter than the other one, it'll invert it. And I'm like, I can't remember all this crap. That's what writing a blog post is good for, though. Here's another one I got, which is get even weirder with scroll-driven animations.
I support this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
so weird. Here, like, just straight up, here's one of the cool hacks you can do. You set overflow clip or overflow auto to an element that doesn't have any overflow, and now it becomes an intersection observer container, and you can watch as just the position of any child moves inside of that without JavaScript, even without a scroll-driven animation. What you're doing is hacking the workflow. You created a scroll port, which then became an observable window, and now you can observe shit as it goes in and out of it. It's super sick. I want to get weirder with it, and we'll see
That's
what I can do
tough
there.
with scroll driven animations, from especially what we saw in the last one, or the one we did on that. Is there's a lot of, I don't want to say gaps, but there still seems to be like scroll driven animations are great. You can do a lot with them, but when you want to get weird or really advanced, it seems like you got to break out the old intersection observer. And that's one of those, I feel like every CSS API has sort of like its JavaScript escape a catch API. And for
Mm-hmm.
scroll driven animations, it's like, You're like, don't use intersection observer. Don't use, oh, it needs intersection observer. Okay. All right. And it's not a hard API, but it's also not an easy one. Anytime something can
Yeah.
fire, and has an array of entries at the same time and thresholds and things, you're like, you can understand the API, you can study it, but then when you go to use it and it's giving you a fire hose of things that aren't quite intersecting at the ones you want, it's not fun.
It is tedious. I totally agree. Let's see. Have I got one more here? Oh, okay. The last one here, mentioning all of the amazing CSS stuff that has come out since 2010 and before. We're at now the longest list of at rules we've ever had. If you've tried nesting with cascade layers and scope and your selectors, you can find yourself 4 or 5 levels deep really easily. And the styles pane in DevTools across all browsers right now, they're suffering. They've been cramming our entire styling world into a single column on the right, or wherever it is that you put that little bar, and you have to scroll that long ass list, which is now packed with media queries, container queries, scopes, just the whole nine. And it is struggling to represent all of this new stuff. And I want to help DevTools figure out what to do with the styles pane. The styles pane needs an iteration. It needs an evolution. We're reaching the maxima of what it can show, and I'd like to be a spearhead in that effort. So
That's a big one to save for the end. You're like, I want to help CSS
change the world.
I want to help modern CSS be better in the dev tool that millions of developers use every day. That's just if I can get around to that sometime this year.
Yeah, it's only one of the most tapped dev tools in there, but yeah, and everyone's got workflows and they're so used to it that it's going to be a really hard thing to try to evolve. You're going to break a lot of people.
No. I want to do that and 5 pull-ups a day. Eat more greens. Well, there are so many things in 2024 with CSS. CSS is one of those languages that has just been on a rocket ship ever since mid to late 2010s, and that rocket ship's not stopping. There are so many amazing things being added that, like I said, it's like in Syndicate. I got to catch up to these, and I feel like we'll need a podcast here soon on all the new stuff to look forward to in 2024. So in 2 to 3 years' time, we can say, you know what? We should start using that.
Brutal.
I feel like I don't ever engage the audience enough. What are your resolutions? I would love to know what other people's are, because most of my resolutions just come from watching Adam do really great things and being like, oh, I should be able to do that. And then Adam is just pushing the envelope and getting weird with scroll driven animations all the time. So I would love to know, what are the things that you want to get good at, or the things that you just, what do you aspire to with CSS in 2024? So let us know on the social medias. We'll have our handles and stuff in the place, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the comments below or whatever. We'd love to hear from you all. So CSS in 2024, Adam, it's going to be a good one, right?
Yeah, let's do it. Here we go.
All right, everybody, we will see you on the next one.
Visit the Planet CSO.